Hey everyone, and welcome to the Q Christian Fellowship Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Gathering, where each month we gather so that we can spend time in community, learning and thinking about the topics that affect the various intersections of our lives. Tonight, we are going to be listening to and hearing the voices of those who have intersex experience, and we want to learn, and after that we'll have some Q&A that won't be on the recording. But yes, we have this gathering, and it's a space to learn, it's a space to grow. The chat will be open if you have questions or things that you would like to circle back to. And yeah, we're gonna have a good time tonight. So to introduce our speakers for today, we're gonna have Bria and Marissa, who will be sharing with us. It looks like we got a couple folks unmuted, but that's no problem. We'll have Marissa and Bria who are going to be sharing with us and introducing themselves. And I've had an opportunity to have a brief conversation with Bukola and myself as we were just getting to know how can our communities and how can our organizations be working together. And so I've been really looking forward to tonight, and I will delay no further and hand it over to them and let them do their things.
So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening here with us. Really looking forward to our conversation today. My name is Bria Brown King. My pronouns are they and she, and I work as the Director of Engagement at Interact Advocates for Intersex Youth. And we'll talk a little bit more about Interact as an organization and what we do after we do some introductions. But I guess I've been engaging in this work in a full-time capacity now for about 4 years in January. And I actually got started in intersex advocacy work when I was a youth advocate in 2018. I started off really not knowing a whole lot about intersex issues. Um, not really having too much experience talking about my own personal story in front of the public. And then in 2019, I had the opportunity to be the first out intersex person to speak about intersex issues on the steps of the Supreme Court. As a member of Intersex Youth Leadership and Development Program, and honestly, things kind of really took off from there. Next thing I know, I was sharing my story publicly in an article that I wrote. It was published in Them magazine. I talked about some really personal things. I came out publicly as intersex in October 2019 and got hired on full time with Interact shortly after that. Yeah. And with that, I will pass it over to Marissa for a brief introduction.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marissa. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the program coordinator at Interact. I've been involved with the intersex community for about 10 years and a first in the youth advocacy program at Interact here. And I've also been attending the intersex conferences that we mentioned earlier. So really became more involved in the intersex community in 2015. And I've had my job here at Interact for about a year and a half now. And it's just very meaningful and very an honor to be doing this work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marissa. And yeah, thank you for joining for the conversation today too. And I don't know how to get everyone's pictures back on the screen, so I'm just looking at the slide. So hopefully I don't make any weird faces or anything like that. Okay. So just a quick overview for our conversation today. We'll start off by doing some Intersex 101, talking about what it means to be intersex, making sure that we're all sort of on the same page and that we all have sort of a foundation, because we don't want to make assumptions about what people know and what people don't know. And we'll be learning about intersex experiences, as well as the challenges that intersex young people face and how they overlap overlap with the broader LGBTQ plus community. And then we'll find out what intersex joy means to us and learn more about ways to support intersex people. I think it's really important to kind of end the formal presentation on a more positive note because we are most of the times when we have these when we do these talks, we're talking about a lot of heavy trauma and we don't talk enough about intersex joy. And so I thought it would be a great way to sort of segue us into our open discussion. And so Interact is the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit dedicated to protecting the rights of people born with variations in their physical sex traits, also known as, people born with intersex traits or variations in their physical sex traits. We use that language interchangeably because there are people with intersex variations who don't use the term intersex. They prefer to use either language that is in alignment with the medical terminology or inclusive terminology like variations and sex characteristics and things like that, which we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Interact was founded in 2006 by Anne Tamar Mattis, who is not an intersex person herself. And I like to mention that because I think it speaks to just how important it is to have allies in this work, in any sort of advocacy work. We could not do this work without the support of our amazing allies. And we sort of have three main buckets of work. So we were founded as a law and policy organization. That's sort of our largest bucket. So we push for local and federal policy developments, all aimed at protecting the rights of intersex people. We also have a youth leadership and development program. I mentioned that I was a part of that program. Marissa was as well. So we are testaments to, just how important it is to invest in our youth advocates and the next generation of youth leaders. And the other sort of main bucket we have is our media and communications. And so we work really hard to make sure that intersex voices are accurately and appropriately represented in the media. And so here is a picture of our very small but very mighty staff. People are always really surprised to learn that our team is so small. And actually, it was not that long ago when we only had two staff members working at the organization, and we actually just hired a development manager. And so we are slowly growing, and it's really exciting. But this is our team. And so intersex refers to bodies that expressed a wide range of physiological variations of sex characteristics and sex development that might not fit traditional conceptions about what quote unquote male or quote unquote female bodies look like. And so we tend to use a very broad definition of intersex. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many people with variations in their physical sex characteristics that don't use the term intersex to describe their experiences. We like to let people know that intersex people are estimated to make up as much as 2% of the population, though we estimate that that number is likely closer to 5%. Again, if we include variations like PCOS, for example, my intersex variation is CAH. Again, a lot of people with these variations don't always use the term intersex to describe themselves and their experience, which is completely okay. We are not the gatekeepers or, we are not the terminology police in terms of, what language people choose to use to describe their experiences. But when we include those variations, into the estimated number of intersex people, we know that it's a lot higher than 2% of the population. And so there are so many different ways to be intersex. Intersex bodies have natural differences in at least one of 7 different components of quote unquote sex. So intersex people can have differences in their reproductive anatomy. So this refers to both internal and external um, organs. So we're talking about genitalia, but we're also talking about internal organs like the gonads, for example. Some intersex people are born with gonadal differences. Um, we're also talking about things like uterus. There are some people, intersex people, who are born, for example, without a uterus or a vaginal canal, for example. Chromosomal differences. So this was something that was really shocking for me to learn when I started doing this work, that XX and XY, one, are not the complete determinant of sex. And also, there are people with chromosomal differences that are not just XX or XY. And so we are typically taught that, in sex ed or wherever we first encounter this information, that girls have XX chromosomes and boys have XY chromosomes. And so we learned that that is not the full and complete truth, that is not the full and complete story, that chromosomes actually develop along the spectrum. Um, and intersex people can have differences in the way that their bodies produces hormones, as well as how their bodies responds to the hormones that it naturally produces. For example, and this is where we see a lot of the controversy around sex testing and in athletics, for example. What hormones does your body create? How does your body respond to those hormones? For example, some people who have XX chromosomes might produce higher levels of testosterone, and some people with XY chromosomes might not produce any testosterone at all. And actually, in some instances, for example, with intersex people who have a variation known as AIS, androgen insensitivity syndrome, these individuals, their bodies don't respond to testosterone, and it actually, as the body's way of like trying to correct itself, converts that to estrogen instead. And so these individuals tend to have a more estrogen based puberty. And so I think it's important for us to talk about, one, how intersex fits into the broader LGBTQ plus umbrella, and also how intersex is not the same as transgender or non-binary or genderqueer or gender fluid. As we just spoke about, intersex has to do with the natural variations in our biological sex, and transgender has to do with our gender identity. And so while intersex and trans are not the same thing, we know that our communities overlap and share so many of the same struggles, right? Oftentimes intersex people are fighting to or excuse me, oftentimes trans people are fighting to access the very necessary care that they need, the very life-saving care that they need. On the other hand, intersex people are fighting against the same procedures and the same care that was being forced on them without their consent as very young children. And so here are just some ways that intersex experiences align with the experiences of trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming youth. So sex discrimination, for example, based on sex stereotypes and sex characteristics. So according to the Equality Act and other federal legislation like the Civil Rights Act and the Affordable Care Act, sex discrimination does include discrimination on the basis of someone's sex characteristics, right? And so we worked really hard at Interact. This is just to give you an idea of like some of the work that we do. We have really great lawyers who work really hard to do that education and let people know that intersex people are actually included, intersex traits are actually included and protected under sex-based non-discrimination laws. And bathroom and locker room access, oftentimes intersex people get left out of these conversations, but for example, um, when it comes to these anti-trans bathroom bills, people don't realize that these bills affect intersex people too. This is something that I personally have experience with. I, depending on, if I choose to wear my full beard and mustache, for example. Today I have long hair. If I decided to like have short hair, I oftentimes get clocked in the restroom. It's often not safe for me to use the women's restroom or the men's restroom, depending on how other people are perceiving me. But this is just an example of how intersex people are also affected by these these anti-trans bathroom and locker room access. Policing access to sports, again, for similar reasons, also affects intersex people. This conversation it comes up a lot, especially when people learned about folks like Caster Semenya, for example, with the Olympics. Now, Caster does not identify as an intersex person, but it's important to know that I think this is a great example of how these bills also affect people who are cisgender as well, because it's really just patriarchal policing of people's bodies, right? And especially when it comes to sports, we've seen throughout history the way that Black women's bodies have been policed, right, and have been perceived as quote unquote too masculine, and we can have further conversation about that as well. And bodily autonomy, efforts to limit gender affirming care, but uh, doctors are changing intersex kids' bodies without their knowledge or consent. And so this is the thing we try to remind folks that what both trans and intersex people are fighting for is the right to bodily autonomy, is the right to access the life affirming care that they need, which also includes intersex kids being allowed to make meaningful decisions about their health care and not have and not be forced into non-consensual medical interventions as young children who are too old to consent and participate in the conversations about their health care. And so here are some of the key issues facing intersex youth: invisibility and anti-intersex bias, often due to people just not knowing and not understanding intersex issues. We're often, again, left out of conversations. Our goal here at Interact and as intersex advocates is to just let people know that we exist, right? Because I still get so, and I think sometimes I have to, I feel like I live in sort of a, a very LGBTQIA plus bubble, and it feels like everybody is just like in the know about intersex issues, and then I step outside of that bubble, and I am reminded very quickly that most people have never heard of the term intersex, and so that erasure, that invisibility, and the anti-intersex bias, there's still so much shame and there's still so much stigma around having an intersex body, having intersex traits. And so, throughout history, those traits have been erased medically, right? In order to force people's bodies to conform what society considers to be quote unquote normal. And that's a decision that throughout history we've left up to the doctors to consider what's normal versus what's in need of surgical correction. Um, Non-consensual medical interventions to quote unquote fix children's bodies, which we were just talking about again. Um, there, you, there is no reason to perform these medical interventions on children who are too young to participate in the conversation, also that you can fit them into these, these boxes that society has created and decided that we belong in, this box or that box, depending on the body parts that we have. Poor health outcomes and lack of competent care for intersex kids, youth, and adults. One thing that we always like to bring to people's attention is that oftentimes when intersex kids are forced into these early medical interventions, it's almost like they don't realize that eventually we'll get older, right? We'll eventually become adults. And what ends up happening is that once we become adults, once we've experienced all the trauma, once we've endured all the trauma, there is no competent mental health care or physical health care or physical health care out there for us. Oftentimes, we are forced to do the emotional labor of educating our providers, right? Which really requires us as intersex people, as the patients, to be fully informed patient self advocates for ourselves in order to get the care we need, right? Which it's just not fair, right? And one of the things that happens one of the interventions is that is often performed on intersex children is the removal of the gonads. And once you remove someone's gonads, you force them to rely on lifelong hormone replacement therapy because you've removed the organ that creates those hormones naturally. And unfortunately, the way that the healthcare system is set up in our country, it means that a lot of intersex people are going without the very necessary care that they need. And so here are some of the human rights organizations that have come out and publicly named these non-consensual surgeries a form of torture. So the World Health Organization, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN Office of High Commissioners for Human Rights, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, San Francisco Human Rights Commission, and the NYC Human Rights Commission. And so human rights organizations have come out and have deemed these surgeries a form of torture. And so why are we still performing them, right? These surgeries are non-life-saving procedures. They have significant lifelong effects that are often recommended to parents because of assumptions about what the child's eventual gender identity and what the child's eventual sexuality might be. And here are some of the examples of the types of procedures that are performed on intersex children. Oftentimes, these surgeries are performed on children before the age of 2, again, before they're old enough to participate meaningfully in the conversation happening about their body, before they're able to say whether or not this is a surgery that they want. Because here's the thing, we are not anti-surgery, right? We are pro-consent, we are pro-bodily autonomy. So moving a working urethral opening so that it's at the tip of the penis, this is known as a hypospadias repair. This is often done so that a child is able to for example, so that a child is able to pee standing up. This surgery is really complicated and often is associated with a lot of risk and often requires multiple follow-up procedures. Creating a vaginal canal. So this is creating a vaginal opening. This procedure is often performed on children, and honestly, doctors say things like, well, you need to have this procedure so that you can have sex with your husband one day. This is something that they told me. And I was very surprised that to learn once I got connected to the intersex community that this is something that was commonly told to my peers as well. So the assumptions that we want a vaginal canal and that we would want a vaginal canal to have sex with a husband one day. Repositioning or reducing the size of an enlarged clitoris. This is known as a clitoroplasty. And removing working gonads. This is the procedure that I just mentioned in the previous slide in that example. This is known as a gonadectomy. Again, all of these procedures are not life-saving procedures. And so I know that was all really heavy and really bad, but I do want to let folks know that there is a movement happening, right? Like there are activists here in the US and around the world doing the work. Change is happening, it's happening slowly, but this is why we need to continue to raise awareness. This is why we need to continue to educate because it's past time that you know intersex people are given the autonomy to make decisions about their own health care. And so here is a slide about New York City, one of the largest hospital systems in New York City, actually coming out publicly and instituting a policy letting the public know that they are not going to be performing these surgeries within their hospital systems. And so this was a really big deal. And so I just wanted to share this slide to let people know that, there is work happening. It's happening slowly, but, every time we give a talk, the hope is that we inspire folks to join us in this movement so that we can continue to spread the word and continue to make a difference. Because again, even if you're not an intersex person, you don't need to be an intersex person to be an intersex advocate. And I can't stress how important it is to have allies joining us in this movement. One, because it's a lot to be a person with lived experience and doing this work. But here are some ways that you can support intersex youth. So we've included some QR codes here. So sharing support and self-advocacy resources. I cannot tell you how important peer support and connection is. I wish I had access to this information when I was an intersex young person. Feeling like I was the only person in the world going through this, I didn't have anybody else to talk to. I didn't know that an organization like Interact existed and that there was work happening in this area. And so we're here to let you know that that the work is happening. And if you know young people who are looking to connect with other young intersex people, just to talk about their experiences and just like have connection, Interact along with Interconnect, which is a longtime intersex support group. We've come together to facilitate a peer support space for intersex youth. It's known as iSpace, and it's for intersex youth between the ages of 13 and 29. And Club Intersex is another great peer support group for intersex people. Both Interconnect and Club Intersex are open to folks of any age, but iSpace, which is a collaboration between Interact and Interconnect, is just for Interact youth. As I mentioned, the Interact Youth Leadership and Development Program, for which Marissa and I are both proud alumni of, is a really great program. I cannot stress how important and how life-changing this program was for me. I would not be here in front of you all today if it wasn't for this program. I went from, again, not having experience talking about intersex issues, to having the opportunity to speak about, to tell my story and to speak about intersex issues all around the world. So it's really exciting. And we just have a ton of brochures and educational materials on our website because oftentimes when we want when we go looking for a resource about intersex issues, we learn that there are not a lot of resources that exist. And so we have to create the materials ourselves. But so you'll find on our website a ton of helpful um, resources that we've created. We have the What We Wish series that was created by Intersex Youth. It's called the What We Wish series because we have a What We Wish Our Doctors Knew, we have a What We Wish Our Teachers Knew, What We Wish Our Parents Knew, and What We Wish Our Friends Knew. And we're in the process of making a What We Wish Our Therapists Knew. We also have an intersex glossary that I think that is a really valuable resource to the community. And how can you personally support intersex youth? I think the lowest hanging fruit is making sure that you're using affirming language, right? We have a link to intersex messaging guides on our website. If you are someone who wants to use, for example, like social media as a form of advocacy, and you want some support on messaging, we have guides for that. Be an upstander, recognize and intervene with discrimination that intersex youth face at school and in healthcare. If you see something, say something. In practice, promote ethical research and data collection on the health and well-being of intersex youth. I can't stress this point enough because the research that does exist overwhelmingly shows that intersex people experience high rates of discrimination and economic insecurities or economic disparities. And, um, you know, it also, the research that exists is also really stigmatizing and pathologizing. And so we're always here letting researchers know, like, hey, we really need ethical research and data collection done on our community and not just research on all of the traumatic things, right? We need longitudinal studies that uh, showcase more of that intersex joy to let people know that actually intersex people can go on to live happy and healthy lives, right? We need to showcase more of that. At least that's my personal opinion. And affirming important truth, right? Difference is wonderful, and bodily diversity is 100% natural. We each have the right to bodily autonomy, and we each have the right to make decisions about our own reproductive health and sexual functioning. And with that, I will stop talking because I'm starting to lose my voice, and I will pass it over to Marissa.
Thanks, Bria, for all that. Really, really awesome. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my story, just so everyone can have an idea about my kind of journey as an intersex person and with how I've gotten where I am now. So kind of just briefly, I was identified at birth as having intersex traits, and I had a vaginoplasty when I was 2. And I grew up not knowing that. It was completely kept a secret from me. Not my parents intentionally trying to harm me, but more so they were just doing exactly what a bunch of Harvard doctors told them. And so they were not about to argue with that. But eventually it started to cause me a sense of shame and made me feel like there was something wrong because I did have a lot of doctor's appointments, but I had no actual like information about any of this. And I didn't really couldn't really understand the little bit of information that was described to me. All I basically got was, oh, you can't really have a period, but it was like I didn't know about this very complicated surgical history and my chromosomes and everything. And so I eventually became very depressed and developed an eating disorder and struggled with that for very, very many years. And eventually, thankfully, turned the tide with my mental health when I connected with Interconnect, which we talked about on the previous slide, which is the support organization for intersex people. And then also right around the same time, actually both a little bit before, connecting with Intersex Youth Advocacy Program here. And the two of those things, I would say, really fundamentally changed my life as far as not feeling alone and not feeling freakish. Honestly, it's what I felt for a very, very long time before I found either organization. Just connecting with others and using my experiences to help others. And just another personal note about myself is I am also a Christian who is also intersex and gay, but I that's a part of my story that I would mention. And as far as how intersex relates to that, it was I was raised in a very sort of conservative household, and so immediately finding out about my intersex variations was like, it made me hate God, turn against God. Like, well, why would you make me like this? Oh, I'm a mistake, blah, blah, blah. But thankfully I've healed with that too. Yeah, really, really credit Interact Youth Advocacy Program and the Intersex support group with really, really changing things for me. Hand it over to Bria.
Thank you so much, Marissa. And I'm always just so moved by your story and just like feel really grateful to be in community and doing this work with you and just like knowing you. I guess like, ooh, here's my Pisces coming in because I was letting Darren and Carrie know that I'm a Pisces, I'm emotional. I don't know if folks can see my face, but if I start crying, I'm just gonna say it's because of my allergies. But that's the thing about doing these talks, you just never know what's gonna come up for you. Even though I don't know, we've probably given about 100 or so talks, it's never easy, right? When you're talking about your trauma. And I feel like I'm still learning so much about myself and like I'm still on this journey of self-discovery, which I feel like probably never ends. But one thing that Marissa said that I just like wanted to uplift is that, you know, it was the same situation for me. I did not have genital surgery when I was an infant. I didn't have genital surgery until I was 13. But what I did experience, even with that being said, was just a lot of like, I think sort of my parents kind of taking on this approach of, the doctor knows what's best and, listen to the doctor, take your medicine the way that the doctor tells you to take it, even though I would experience like really bad side effects from medication due to my like medication that I had to take because of my intersex variations. And I'll just say before I like rewind that I am getting really great care here, medical care here from my providers here in Tulsa, and I just feel really grateful for that because and I do not take that for granted because I know that that was not always the case for me, and that is very rarely the case for my intersex peers. And so just shout out to all of my providers here in Tulsa. But yeah, I grew up, my variation is congenital adrenal hyperplasia. I grew up like pretty like I think I was like probably the cutest baby ever. I always like had a bunch of bows and like all of the cute like what we consider to be like really girly outfits that my mom loved to dress me in. And so when I was in about second grade, I think I was probably about eight at that time. I started to go through puberty. I had a precocious puberty, which just means I went through puberty a lot earlier than my peers. Um, and I was not prepared because in second grade, that's not when the puberty conversation typically starts happening. But for me, it happened, and my body started to like do some really interesting things. I had my first period. At the same time, I was developing breasts. I was also developing facial hair and body hair. Um, and, I did not know what to make of that. I did not feel prepared when people asked me questions because, kids are curious and people want to know why you look the way that you do. And I honestly didn't have any answers for them. I was just as confused as they were. And also because of the medication and, just like I felt like I was constantly needing to get my medication adjusted. My hormones were all over the place. I also had really bad acne all over my face and my chest and my back and my arms. Um, so, I just, I guess I will sum up my childhood experience with saying it was really difficult. I experienced a lot of bullying. Um, and again, didn't really know, like, I didn't really have an answer for people when they asked me why I look the way that I do. Like, people wanted to know, why do you look like a man? I don't know. My mom would just tell me that I had a hormonal imbalance. And so that's just sort of what I went with. And so I think I was probably around 13 when I discovered the term intersex. And I don't really know like how I discovered it. I don't know if it just sort of came to me, but I do know that I must have been searching internally, externally for some sort of validation, trying to make sense of my experience because again, I wasn't getting a whole lot of information from my parents, my doctors, in a way that made sense to me. And I also felt really alone. I didn't know any other people that had this variation, or I didn't know that there were other people out there that like me that existed. And so I remember telling my friends that I was intersex, just a couple close friends, and so they want to know, well, what is that? Like, I don't know what that means, and I'm like, well, me either. I just knew that it was a term that fit well with me, and at the time, I probably used like a very inaccurate definition of intersex that we wouldn't use today. But it's like I imagine that from what I can from what I can remember, I just did the best I could to describe what the term meant for me. And I did not utter the word intersex again um, for probably another like 10 or so years. It wasn't until I um, was about 25 where I was like at a point in my life where I really, really needed some answers because up until that point, I had I had still been getting bullied pretty bad for having these like masculine and feminine traits. Um, and so I decided that I was going to start hiding myself and hiding behind my clothes, and I started to like adopt a really masculine expression because it just was easier, it was safer, and everybody already told me that I looked like a man, so I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to run with that because being femme presenting, even though I think that that's sort of like what I desire to be, it just drew a lot of attention to myself. And I wanted to keep myself safe, y'all. I'm not gonna lie. I needed to just like get through the day, right? And so I started to dress masculine, and I also just started to sort of fade into the background. I stopped wanting to draw too much attention to myself, um, and because I didn't want to get bullied more, and so I just sort of lost my voice. I lost my like sense of self. I lost my voice, and um, I remember being about 25. I had finished college, and I was like maybe 2 years earlier, and I was just trying to figure out, you know, what my purpose was, and I knew that I was put here for something greater. I just didn't know what that what that thing was, right? And so I someone gave me the advice to just walk in the direction of my dreams, and that things will unfold for me that the way that they're meant to. And so I trusted that, and I trusted myself, and I just, I didn't know where it was going to lead me, but it led me at 25 to a BuzzFeed video on YouTube. Um, and I think it was titled What is Intersex, or What It's Like to Be Intersex. And that video changed my life. For the first time, I saw live intersex people, and intersex people of color, people who look like me, embracing their bodily differences. And just like seemingly happy and laughing, things that I just did not know I was allowed to do. Again, I was used to hiding, and I was used to just trying to do anything I needed to do that was the complete opposite of whatever it was that they were doing in that video, because I just wanted to stay safe. But that video changed my life, because I knew that there were people out there like me, and that that my journey was just beginning. And somehow that video led me to finding Interact, and it led me to finding Interact's youth program. And I applied, not really expecting a whole lot. Next thing I know, I had an interview with the one of the Interact staff members, and then I was in the program, and it was just so surreal. A week after that interview, I was on a hangout call, a virtual hangout call. And in that hangout call was Pigeon Pagonis, the very person that I saw on that BuzzFeed video that changed my life. And I was freaking out. I was fangirling, because I was just like, I cannot believe that Pigeon and is like here live, or like not live, but in this hangout call. I just like couldn't pay attention to anything other than that. But you know, a couple months after that, I went to an intersex panel at a Pride event that Harvard was holding, because I felt like I had to go and I had to like see what it was about. I was eager to learn, and there I got to meet Emily Quinn and Sean Cypher Wall, also two of the other people that were in that BuzzFeed video that I saw a couple months prior. And then next thing I know, I'm speaking on the steps of the Supreme Court about intersex issues. I'm coming out as intersex. And not long after that, just a few months after that, I was working at Interact and promoted to director of engagement. And that was, yeah, 4 years ago. And so here I am now, and I feel really grateful to just, I feel like my journey was a really serendipitous one. And every time we get invited to speak, and every time I have the opportunity to share my story, I just feel really honored and just truly, truly grateful. Um, and so before we get into the discussion, I just thought it was, like I said, I think it would just be really great for us to end on a positive note, and just talking about what intersex joy means to us, because oftentimes in this work, it's filled with a lot of like trauma sharing, um, trauma bonding, and just like, putting all of that pain on display. But I really want people to know that we are so much more than the trauma that we experienced and the pain and the suffering. Like we are actually like really cute. And this is a photo from a few of us at Interconnect, the intersex um, support group, support organization. They every year since the 90s have held this beautiful conference, and it's an opportunity for us to gather in person and just like be in community together and just like experience just the joy of just being together. And there are like, we laugh together, we cry together, we dance together, we did karaoke together at this conference, ate good food, and it was just so healing. And I think that this is where my intersex joy comes from, just being able to be in community with other intersex people and just exist and just laugh and eat good food. um but yeah, I guess with that, I'll hand it over to Marissa if you have anything to share about intersex joy and what it means to you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I've had a lot of intersex joy over the last several years. I think one of them has just been um, connecting with others, especially some of the people who are kind of now like my inspirations, have really inspired me to where I'm at now. To know that there are actually some great doctors out there, and some of them are, a lot of them are on Interact's medical advisory group, and they're lovely, and so that's brings me a lot of joy. And then also just seeing at the intersex conference, especially like the young intersex children, and how um, things are a little bit different now than they were 30 years ago when I was a child, and the parents being open with them is very heartwarming to me. Um, yeah, and I think mostly just the lifelong friendships and colleagues I have through the work that I do. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marissa. I just wanted to uplift what you said about the doctors too, because a lot of what we have in common, unfortunately, as intersex people, I think is just like having adverse or like traumatic experiences in healthcare settings, and finding this community, getting involved with this work, and learning that there are actually so many doctor allies, is really just such a treat. And to just be able to be friends with them and be able to just text them, if I have a question, I just feel really grateful. And then I know Marissa wanted to share a little bit about some resources here as well, so I'll let you do that.
Yeah, these are just three books written by three different theologians who have really sort of dedicated their careers to this very specific area of intersex and religion and Christianity. Susanna Cornwall on the book on the everyone's, I guess that's everyone's left too, but she's in the UK, and then the middle book here, Religion and Intersex Perspectives from Science to Law, Culture, and Theology, that just came out either end of last year or this year. Her name's Stephanie Budway, Dr. Stephanie Budway. She's a theologian and professor at Vanderbilt University here. Lovely, lovely person. And then on the right, that book is Six Differences in Christian Theology, Male, Female, and Intersex by Dr. Megan DeFranza. And they are dense reads, but they're very, very interesting and very, very They actually point out how there are various references to intersex people in the Bible and other religious books. So those are some very resources I couldn't help but not mention to you all.
Thank you so much, Marissa. And yeah, with that, I think we are ready for our discussion portion.